Nissan Armada valve cover replacement. I'm Brian Essa from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you through the steps of replacing the valve covers. So we're going to be using factory parts on this job, and these are the part numbers. I will link all these up in the description of the video. That way if you need to get these, you can pick them up. So on the valve covers, the tube seals are non-serviceable. That's why we need to replace the gas, not just the gasket, but the whole valve cover itself. So like I said, these tube seals here are not serviceable. So we're going to get started by removing the two bolts on the front of the cover. And then in the back of the cover, there's going to be two rubber grommets that we need to lift up on the left and right side. So we're going to remove the air snorkel here by loosening up the hose clamps. I'm going to use my M12 3/8 drive cordless ratchet here. This helps make things go a lot faster. So once you get the clamps loose, next step is you're going to follow these air vent hoses up and pull them off. There's going to be two hoses, one on the right and one on the left, and you pull them both off. Then you'll wiggle the air duct and pop it off the air box and off the throttle body. And set aside. We're going to unplug the mass airflow sensor, and there's going to be two little wire loom catches we're going to unplug. And we're going to pop the clips for the air cleaner box here and pull the lid off. Now that the air cleaner is removed, we're going to unplug the coils by pushing the tabs and pushing the connector off. And you're going to go ahead and do that for the remaining three on this driver's side here. Now that you got the coils unplugged like this, you can start lifting the wiring harness up to get more room. So the next step is the wiring harness is held down with a few little catches here, and you're going to use some needle nose pliers and squeeze them like this, and then push the wiring harness off. Now that the wiring harness is free from the little brackets, we're going to start pulling the wiring harness upwards and towards the center of the car. And then we're going to unplug all four of the injectors on this side. Now that the injectors are unplugged, we're going to move towards the front and unplug the ground strap and the two little connectors on the front of the cover. Now that you got the ground strap and the wiring harness off the little bracket here, you can start lifting up and you'll get a little bit more slack in it now. As you start moving towards the back of the wiring harness, you'll find a few more of the little catches and you'll just pop those off. Now there's going to be a vent hose that we're going to remove, so one on the valve cover and one on the intake. Okay, now that the wiring harness is mostly unbolted, we're going to use a bungee cord and wrap it around the wiring harness and hook it onto the windshield wipers and pull the wiring harness up as high as I possibly can without damaging anything. Now we're going to take the bolts out of the coils. I'm going to use my M12 ratchet here to make things go faster again. I'm going to link this up in the description of the video. That way if you want to check this out, you can. It really makes jobs like this go really fast. Now that you got the coils unbolted, you can set those aside. And then on the front of the valve cover here, there's a little bracket. We're going to take the 10mm bolt out and set that bracket aside. And that's going to give us a lot more access to get the valve cover out. At the very back of the valve cover, the oxygen sensor is plugged in right here. We need to pop that off too. And then once we get that off, we can start removing the bolts. There's going to be, I believe, 12 of the bolts in total. So I like to use the new part as a reference to figure out where all the bolts are. So I'm going to use my M12 Makita here to take out the 12 bolts. I could not imagine doing this job without this. It would take forever. Okay, once we got all the bolts removed, you can take the pry bar and put it right here in the corner and give the valve cover a little pry. Then you can just lift the valve cover and pull it out of the vehicle like this. So now we're going to clean the cylinder head surface, and I'm going to use rags and a little bit of brake clean. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe the dirt and debris away from the valve, the inside of the cylinder head. So I'm going to wipe upwards on the top and downwards on the bottom, being careful not to get the debris inside the actual cylinder head. And in the corners of the can lobes, there's going to be silicone, and we need to scrape that out. I just like to use a little flat blade screwdriver and lightly scrape all the silicone out, and do that for the front and the back of this can lobe. So now that the surface is all clean, The next step is we're going to put a little bit of silicone in the corners of the cam lobes, and I like to use the Right Stuff by Permatex, and just put a little dollop in the very corners like this. And I'll make sure I'll leave a link in the description of the video so you guys can pick up the Right Stuff if you need to pick that up. Next, we're going to install the valve cover gasket into the valve cover itself, and make sure you press it in really good into all the grooves. And then once we get that pressed in, then we can start feeding it back into the car. So you're just going to have somebody hold the wiring harness out of your way, or if you've got the bungee cord high enough, you can angle it in there and just take your time, being careful not to snag the valve cover gasket on anything as you go in. And then once you do, you just press it on over the tube seals. Then what I like to do is use a dental mirror and look around the entire edge of the valve cover and make sure that the gasket's in place. Now you can start all the bolts and run them in until they're snug. And then I printed out this diagram to show us how the valve covers are torqued down. So you're going to torque down in a crisscross pattern so you can follow the diagram here on how to do that. And also you're going to do this in 2 passes, and then here are the torque specs here at the very bottom of the diagram. This is courtesy of ALLDATA. Now that the cover is all torqued down, in the very back you can start plugging in the oxygen sensor back into the bracket. And then you can plug the coils back in and bolt those up. Now that the coils are in, we're going to start laying the wiring harness back down, and then start in the back and work our way forward. And I'm going to start with the injectors by plugging all 4 of the injectors in, taking your time to make sure you push them in and hear them click. And once you get them all 4 plugged in and click in position, the next step is going to be right here in the front is going to be the ground strap, and go ahead and hook that back up in the front right here with the 10mm bolt and bolt that down. Now you can take the wiring harness and pull your coil wire harness through and line it all up and plug in all 4 of the coils. And once again, you're going to push them in until you hear that click. And you can kind of tell by how the wiring harness lays out how everything's going to plug into it. It's pretty straightforward. And you can also clip the wiring harness back into its little brackets that hold it in place on the top and bottom of the wiring harness. Now you can bolt up the little metal bracket that went on the front of the cover here, and also plug in the vent line. Make sure you route it underneath the little hose here and down into place. Now you can reinstall the lid for the air cleaner and clip it in. Install the wiring harness into the bracket, plug in the mass airflow sensor, and now what we're going to do is just kind of work our way from the back to the front and double check that everything is plugged back in and everything is routed correctly. Now we're going to get started on the passenger side by unplugging all the injectors and also unplugging all the coils. And we're going to pop the wire looms free from their little perches, and what we're going to do is we're going to start lifting the wiring harness up as high as we can get it. And then once you can take the wire injector harness and flip it over out of your way on this particular side. It has a little bit more room. So we're going to unbolt the coils, and also in the back is going to be the oxygen sensors mounted to the valve cover. We're going to pop that out. Then on the thick main wiring harness here, there's a little bracket that's bolted to the valve cover. You're going to take the 10mm bolt out and remove the bracket from off the top of the valve cover. Now you're just going to lift the wiring harness up as high as you can, remove all 12 of the bolts, and also there's going to be a vent line right here. You're going to remove that vent hose too. And then once that's done, we start working the valve cover out of the car, and being careful not to snag it on things, and just take your time to work it out. So we're going to clean up the cylinder head surface just like we did the opposite side, and also make sure we get the silicone out of the corners. Then we'll install the gasket into the valve cover. We're going to put a little dollop of the Right Stuff into the corner of the cam lobes on this. And then after that, we'll start working the valve cover back into the car. So you're going to go in at an angle and twist, kind of a rotate clockwise angle, and that's the best way to get it in. It helps if somebody can hold the wiring harness up for you. And once you get the valve cover back in, I like to double check it again with the mirror and make sure everything's good. Then after that, we can install all the bolts and start tightening them down. We're going to use the same diagram and pattern that we used on the opposite side. And once again, here is it courtesy of All Data. You can reinstall the coils, and then after you get the coils installed and bolted up, then you can take the little metal bracket that held the wiring harness down and slide it underneath the wiring harness here and bolt it back up. Now we're going to start laying the wiring harness back into position and flip the injector harness back into place. Start plugging the injector harness back in. Make sure you hear those clicks, and just take your time to route everything and get everything routed correctly, and start plugging them back into the little catches that hold the wiring harness down onto the valve covers, and make sure everything is secure and nice and snug. Now that the coils and plugs are all resecured, you're going to take the vent valve, go ahead and reinstall that onto the valve cover and onto the intake, the oil cap from the old valve cover, and put it onto the new one. And then after that, we're going to install the air cleaner, and you're going to take the vent lines and put them back over the long two skinny ones. And then you bolt the air cleaner up to the throttle body and air box. And now we're ready to install the top engine cover by pushing it on into the grommets, putting the two bolts in and installing that. And that'll complete the job of replacing the valve covers on a Nissan Armada. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos, encourage you to subscribe, and also to remind you that I will be linking up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description. That way, if you need to pick any of that up, you can get that. And I'd like to thank you again for watching.